Carson was busy fishing, surrounded by nothing but snowy trees and complete silence. He was so focused on the small ice hole in front of him, watching his line to see if he'd caught anything, that he didn't notice the huge shape moving toward him through the snow. The only hint he got was the sudden stillness in the air, the sharp wind no longer stinging his cheeks. That break in the wind made him turn, just in time to see something he could hardly believe. Carson had rented a small cabin deep in the woods, hoping to reconnect with himself, or at least that's what his therapist, Dr. Green, had suggested. Burned out from work, Carson had been told to unplug from everything, his phone, his laptop, even emails, and just breathe. So he did. That's what brought him out here, kneeling beside a hole he'd cut into the frozen lake. To his surprise, he'd actually gotten good at ice fishing. He'd already caught 2 fish. "One more," Carson mumbled to himself, eyeing the fish he'd laid out beside him. They weren't very big, and he figured if he could get just one more, it might make a decent meal. But his focus was about to backfire. Locked in on the line, he didn't hear the faint crunches of snow. He didn't notice what looked like a tree getting bigger in the corner of his eye, until it was clearly not a tree at all. The big brown figure wasn't just approaching, it was stalking. It was a bear. The freezing wind didn't help, blasting against his face and making it hard to see. Carson kept squinting at the hole in the ice. Then, all at once, the wind stopped. He blinked, finally able to open his eyes fully again. Carson frowned and barely turned his head, his eyes shifting from the hole to the shadow that was moving in. "What the—" He started, but froze. There it was. A massive bear. His eyes widened as the animal suddenly charged. Carson scrambled back in a panic, but the slick ice made it worse. He fell flat, now sprawled on the frozen surface as a wave of adrenaline crashed through his body. Every part of him wanted to run, to escape, but there was no time and nowhere to go. All he could do was raise his arms over his face, bracing for the worst. Time seemed to stretch as Carson shut his eyes. He'd seen wildlife documentaries. He knew how this went. Bears didn't show mercy. But he also knew he couldn't just lie there. He had to try something. Anything. He forced his arms down and opened his eyes. The bear was just a few feet away, still sprinting full speed. Carson let out a shaky yelp, but instead of slamming into him, the bear leapt right over him. Shocked, Carson twisted to look back, completely confused. What was going on? His heart was racing so fast he barely noticed his own footing, until he slipped again, this time cracking his head against the ice. As his vision blurred and he opened his eyes, he wasn't sure what he was seeing. Did he hit his head too hard? Maybe he was imagining it, because the bear hadn't run from him. It had leapt past him, and now looked like it was fighting something else. Carson's vision was fuzzy, and no matter how many times he blinked, his eyes just wouldn't focus. Still, even though he couldn't see well, he could hear everything, and what he heard made his stomach drop. Low growls, heavy grunts, and even a sharp yelp echoed across the ice, but his sight stayed blurry. Then it hit him. Maybe it wasn't a head injury at all. Maybe he was crying. The stress had pushed him past the edge. He wiped his eyes and slowly pushed himself up, and as his vision started to clear, things didn't exactly feel safer. Whatever the bear had attacked was now bolting toward the woods. A gray blur of fur disappeared into the trees. Carson felt his knees go weak. Now it was just him and the bear. Miraculously, the animal just sat down and let out a low grunt. It didn't look aggressive anymore. Carson wanted to believe it was over, but he had no idea this was only the beginning. Carson stood frozen, unsure of what to do next, still gripped by fear as the huge animal moved toward him. His heart pounded so loud it felt like it might burst out of his chest. The bear's gaze stayed locked on him, and Carson couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His legs felt like concrete. The bear took one slow step, and Carson's brain screamed at him to run, but his body didn't budge. This was it, he thought. He was going to die right here on this frozen lake. But instead of charging, the bear casually reached out and swiped one of the 2 fish Carson had caught. Carson watched, frozen in place, as the bear's enormous paw dragged one of the fish toward it. The bear sniffed it once, then, in one clean motion, tossed it into its mouth. Carson blinked, stunned. Fear still gripped him, but now it was tangled with confusion. The bear didn't care about him. It just wanted his fish. Relief started to seep in, though he stayed completely still, eyes glued to the animal. The bear chewed slowly, almost like it was enjoying the flavor, occasionally glancing back at Carson. Every second crawled by. The bear's size and presence were overwhelming, and Carson knew one wrong move could change everything. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. The bear, now with the fish between its teeth, looked at him again. Carson's body was still locked in place, unsure what to do. Run? Stay? The bear's eyes scanned him like it was trying to figure out if he was dangerous or just part of the background. Carson fought to stay calm, even though his hands were trembling. Finally, the bear seemed satisfied. It turned away, focusing entirely on its stolen fish, and started to walk off. Carson stayed put, watching in disbelief. The massive animal lumbered across the ice, slowly shrinking into the snowy distance. He felt his muscles begin to loosen, though his heart was still thudding in his chest. The whole thing had been like something out of a dream, except it was real, and somehow he was still alive. He stood there in shock, not sure what to think. All he could do was hope the bear wouldn't come back. As he watched it disappear into the trees on all fours, he didn't dare move. His eyes stayed locked on its fading shape. The bear's retreat felt like a quiet win. Each step it took brought a little more peace. Carson's breathing began to settle, the danger finally starting to fade. He thought about packing up and heading back to the cabin. But something stopped him. His eyes stayed locked on the bear. Just as it reached the tree line, the bear suddenly paused. It turned its head and looked right at him. Carson froze, heart thudding again. What was this? Why was the bear staring at him like that? There was something in the bear's gaze, intense, almost thoughtful. Carson felt a chill crawl up his back. He didn't know what to do. The bear's eyes held his, and for a second it felt like time had stopped. Confused thoughts swirled through his mind. Then the bear gave a low grunt and sat down, almost like it was waiting for him. Carson blinked. Was this real? Was he seeing things? The bear didn't seem aggressive anymore. If anything, it looked calm, like it wanted him to come closer. Carson was torn. Part of him screamed to walk away, but a strange part of him wanted to follow. He had no idea why, but something told him this wasn't just some random wildlife encounter. There was more going on here, and even though it made no sense, he found himself stepping forward. His legs felt weak, but his body moved anyway. He looked around, half expecting a film crew to pop out and yell that it was all a joke. But it was only him and the bear. Carson took another shaky step. The bear just sat there, watching with steady eyes, not threatening, just waiting. Carson slowly gathered his things, his hands trembling as he packed up his gear. His eyes kept jumping back to the bear. Once he was ready, he stood up and took a deep breath. The bear moved slightly, almost like a nod, though Carson wasn't sure if it was real or just wishful thinking. Still, his heart pounded as he took that first step toward whatever this was. The moment Carson started walking, the bear stood and continued toward the trees. Carson hesitated, then followed. The bear moved with surprising grace for something so big. Carson's thoughts spun out in every direction, but his feet kept moving. It was like something deep inside had already made the choice for him. He didn't understand why, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to follow. The bear glanced back every so often, checking on him. Each time their eyes met, and Carson felt a strange calm settle over him. It was enough to keep going. The fear was still there, but curiosity was beginning to take over. He followed the bear deeper into the woods, wondering where they were going and what it all meant. The path through the trees was tight and twisting, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The bear moved steadily ahead, its presence strong, but oddly comforting too. Carson's head was full of questions. What did the bear want? Why was it leading him somewhere? He didn't know, but he felt a quiet pull to keep walking, to see this through. Despite his nerves, something inside him said not to stop, so he didn't. The only sounds were his own steps and the bear's. Everything else was still. Carson stayed close, unsure where this was heading, but completely unable to turn back. Carson kept a safe distance, his eyes fixed on the bear's back. There was something about the way the bear walked, like it had a clear goal, that made Carson even more curious. He started talking to himself, trying to make sense of it all. "This is nuts," he muttered. Why am I doing this?" He looked around as if the trees might offer an answer. "Feels like something out of a fairy tale," he added, shaking his head. The bear didn't seem to care about his rambling. Carson was really just talking to keep his own nerves in check. He started wondering if the bear needed help somehow. After all, it had just saved him from whatever that other creature was. That moment replayed in his mind, how the bear had leapt in and chased the other animal off. Maybe it wasn't random. Maybe the bear had a reason for bringing him out here. The fear in Carson's chest began to shift, replaced with something else. Maybe even a sense of responsibility. He couldn't just walk away now. There was something here, something between them. A weird kind of bond was starting to form, and he needed to see where it led. He took a breath and kept going, trusting whatever instinct was pulling him forward. "All right, big guy," he said softly. "Let's see what this is all about." Following a wild bear into the woods made no sense. But for some reason he felt, okay, not safe exactly, but confident, like he could trust the bear, even if he didn't understand why. Carson carefully followed, scanning the forest as they went. He made mental notes of anything that stood out: a fallen tree, a pile of rocks, even a narrow stream cutting through the snow. The landscape was unfamiliar, and every tiny sound made his pulse jump. Still, his eyes stayed on the bear, who moved steadily ahead. The forest seemed to close in, the trees growing taller, the shadows longer. He was on full alert now, his steps slow and steady. At one point he stopped and pulled out his compass to check their direction. The needle spun a moment before pointing north. Carson memorized it, then checked the water bottle and small first aid kit in his backpack. Everything was still there. After a steadying breath, he continued after the bear. The forest felt thick, like it was pressing in on him from all sides. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of snow crunching beneath their feet. Carson's heart beat fast, but his focus stayed sharp, eyes locked on the bear's path. The animal moved with clear purpose, and Carson could only hope that whatever it was leading him toward would soon make sense. Every step carried him farther from familiar ground, but turning back didn't feel like an option anymore. He was too far in, driven by curiosity, and something he couldn't quite explain. Then, without warning, the bear stopped. It let out a strange sound and began pawing at the ground. The noise it made was low and filled with something that almost sounded like sorrow. Carson's chest tightened. The bear's sounds, soft grunts, quiet whines, carried a sadness that was hard to ignore. It clawed at the snow and dirt in a frenzy. Carson felt himself moving forward, pulled by the bear's distress. He crept closer, step by careful step, trying not to startle it. The bear didn't look aggressive. It looked heartbroken. Its paws tossed aside snow and clumps of earth. Carson scanned the ground, trying to understand. Something wasn't right here. The disturbed area didn't look natural. He knelt down slowly, reaching out with hesitation. That's when he saw it. Scattered in the churned-up snow were signs that didn't belong, things no wild animal would leave behind, items clearly left by people. And suddenly, everything felt even stranger. His curiosity now fully sparked, Carson kept searching. He uncovered things that didn't belong out here, an old rope and a dirty, weather-beaten backpack. His breath caught as he looked at them. The rope was frayed and stiff, its fibers worn with age. The backpack was half buried, caked in dirt like it had been here for a long time. Carson's thoughts raced. What had happened here? And why had the bear brought him to this spot? He glanced over at the animal, which had stopped digging, and now watched him closely. He turned back to the backpack, unzipping it carefully. The sound of the zipper echoed in the quiet woods. Inside were a few worn-down items, a torn map, a dented water bottle, and a small handful of old photographs. Carson reached in and pulled the photos out. They were faded, the faces nearly impossible to make out. But still, there was something haunting about them. These belonged to someone who had been here. A chill ran through him. Carson searched the rest of the backpack, checking every pocket, hoping for a name or ID, anything to tell him who had left it here. But there was nothing. No clues, no answers, just more questions. He looked back at the bear again. It hadn't moved, still watching him with a quiet intensity. Carson could feel that this wasn't just a random moment. There was meaning here, something important the bear wanted him to see. The sadness in the bear's eyes, the way it had clawed at the ground, it all pointed to something deeper. Carson couldn't explain it, but he felt it, like the bear was trying to tell him something that really mattered. He looked around at the disturbed snow and scattered earth, wondering what had happened in this place. His resolve firmed. He couldn't walk away from this, not now. Carson crouched a little closer and spoke softly, his voice calm and steady. "Hey, buddy. It's okay," he murmured. "I'm here to help." The bear's expression seemed to change ever so slightly, its eyes a little softer, its body a bit more still. Encouraged, Carson stepped forward. "We'll figure this out together," he said, the words surprising even him. Somehow, this bear didn't feel like a wild threat anymore. It felt like a partner in something they both didn't fully understand. The bear let out a low, sad sound that echoed through the trees. Carson's heart ached at the sound, and it made him even more sure. This wasn't just a coincidence. The bear needed help, and now Carson was part of whatever this was. He scanned the area again, carefully studying the ground for more signs. The backpack and rope were proof people had been here. But what kind of story was behind it? He didn't know yet, but he was determined to find out. He turned to the bear, lifting a hand gently and pointing ahead. "Show me," he said, his voice low but steady. The bear paused, seeming to study him for a moment. Then it turned and began walking again, deeper into the woods. Carson followed, heart thudding in his chest, every step pulling him further into this strange, quiet mystery. He kept his eyes on the bear, amazed at how it seemed to understand him. The deeper they went, the darker the forest grew. Shadows stretched between the trees, and the quiet grew heavier. Still, he didn't stop. He couldn't. The bear's trust was guiding him, like a soft light in the middle of the unknown. Carson recognized the place the moment they arrived. Old metal traps hidden in the brush, barely visible under a light cover of snow. The rusty jaws caught just enough light to make his skin crawl. His breath hitched as memories of documentaries warning about these devices flooded back. He turned toward the bear, whose eyes looked straight into his, full of something like a plea. Suddenly, it all made sense. Carson's stomach dropped as he realized these traps were likely the source of the bear's distress. He couldn't ignore it. He had to do something. He stepped cautiously toward the first trap, watching every move. The bear stood a few feet back, silent but focused. Carson crouched down and studied the trap's old mechanism. Despite the rust, it was still dangerous. The thought of any animal, especially this one, getting caught in it made his chest tighten. Carson began disarming the traps one by one, working slowly and carefully. The cold metal bit into his hands, making his fingers sting. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't stop. He bent the springs, jammed the release, and snapped open the jaws. Each time he finished one, the bear's posture eased. Its breathing grew calmer. A quiet sense of pride filled Carson. Every trap he disabled seemed to bring him closer to understanding why the bear had brought him here. He felt his fear melt away, replaced by a calm determination. The bear had trusted him, and he wasn't going to let it down. As he worked, he started talking, his voice low and steady. "You knew I could help, didn't you?" he said with a small smile, meeting the bear's gaze. The animal blinked, and Carson couldn't help but think how smart it was. But then he noticed something that changed everything. Caught in one of the trap's rusted teeth was a small clump of brown fur. Fresh. Carson's stomach dropped again. The bear hadn't just been warning him about the traps. It had been caught. It was hurt. His heart pounded faster. "Hang on, buddy," he whispered, eyes scanning the snowy ground for more clues. If the bear was injured, he needed to help, and quickly. He spotted fresh tracks leading away from the trap site. Without hesitating, he followed them. The bear, now limping slightly, walked behind him, still quiet, still close. The tracks were easy to follow, clear in the snow, cutting deeper into the forest. Carson picked up his pace, careful not to make too much noise. His pulse raced, but he stayed focused, every part of him tuned into the path ahead. The bear moved beside him now, step for step, silent and steady. Carson didn't know where the trail would end, but he was committed. Something about this felt like a mission, one he couldn't walk away from. They moved together, slow and quiet, alert for anything that might be ahead. Every sound in the forest seemed sharper. A crunch of branches, the flutter of birds, even the wind felt louder now. Carson's nerves were stretched tight, but he kept moving. The trees grew thicker as they walked, casting longer shadows across their path. Carson's thoughts were laser-focused, his instincts guiding him deeper into the woods. Then, faintly, he heard something. Voices. He held up a hand and motioned for the bear to stay put. His heart was pounding now, hard and fast. The voices were close and careless, filled with rough laughter. They had no idea he was near. Carson crept closer, crouched low, his steps slow and silent. He kept to the shadows, every muscle tense. The bear watched from behind, still and quiet, its eyes reflecting Carson's same focus. He spotted the camp. It was rough, messy, tents, tarps, and shelters thrown together in a clearing. Scattered gear gave away what kind of people were here. Carson's stomach turned. Poachers. He stared at the camp, anger bubbling under his fear. These people were responsible for the traps, for hurting the bear. He didn't know what he was going to do next, but he knew one thing: he had to find a way to stop them. He took a deep breath and stayed low, ready for whatever came next. Carson crouched low behind a bush, peering through the leaves at the poachers' camp. From where he was hidden, he could clearly see several men moving around. Their faces were stern and focused, busy with their tasks, and completely unaware of his presence. Carson narrowed his eyes, taking in every detail. He needed real proof of what they were doing. His heart pounded as he considered his next move. He was set on making sure these men faced justice. Then he saw it. Cages. Inside them were animals, including a few bear cubs. The sight stopped him cold. His blood boiled. The tiny cubs looked scared, their small paws gripping the metal bars tightly. Carson's stomach turned. There was no way he could walk away now. He scanned the camp carefully, taking note of where the cages were and watching how the poachers moved around them. The urgency of the moment hit him like a wave. He couldn't waste time. And then it all clicked. The bear hadn't just saved him earlier, it had brought him here for a reason. She was a mother trying to save her cubs. That realization hit Carson like a bolt of lightning. Every moment from earlier suddenly made perfect sense. This was no random act, this was a desperate call for help. Carson's resolve locked in. He wouldn't let her down. He turned his attention back to the camp. His brain kicked into high gear as he began running through possible plans. The risk was high, but the stakes were higher. Just then, he noticed all the poachers heading into their tent. Their voices and laughter faded as the flap closed behind them. This was his window. Carson quickly studied the area again, marking where the cages were, spotting the clearest paths, and keeping an eye out for anything that might trip him up. His heart pounded as he finalized his next steps. The bear stood behind him, watching, silent, steady, ready. Carson moved forward, slow and careful, each footstep measured. He was fully alert, eyes darting for signs of movement. When he reached the first cage, the bear cubs inside whimpered softly. His chest tightened. They looked so small, so scared. Working quickly, he reached for the lock, his fingers trembling slightly, but still steady enough. The pressure pushed him to stay sharp. Time was short, and he couldn't get caught. Before freeing the cubs, Carson knew he needed proof. He pulled out his phone and began filming. He captured the cages, the traps, and the camp setup. He even got clear shots of the poachers' faces when they'd been outside earlier. Once he had the evidence, he backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. He slipped back into the trees, his breath shallow, his heart racing. But he'd done it. He had what he needed. He moved to a safer spot and pulled out his phone again, this time to make a call. He reported the poachers and gave their exact location. The person on the other end responded quickly, promising a swift response. Carson's hands were still shaking as he spoke. His voice was firm, but the adrenaline was clear. "I've got evidence," he said, eyes flicking back toward the camp. "Please, send help." The dispatcher's calm voice offered little comfort, but it was something. At least now he wasn't alone in this. Help was on the way. That call gave him a sliver of hope. Carson ended it with his heart still pounding, feeling like things were finally under control. But just as he turned around, he saw the bear rushing toward the cages. Panic surged through him. The sudden movement startled him. Any noise could give them away. "No, wait," Carson whispered urgently, but the bear was already halfway there. He had to act quickly before everything fell apart. The mother bear's desperation was clear. Her focus was locked on the cages, on her trapped cubs. Carson took a deep breath and ran after her. The noise didn't go unnoticed. The poachers burst out of their tent, startled and shouting. Carson's heart slammed in his chest as the men stumbled into the clearing, confused and angry. "What the hell is going on?" one of them yelled. Carson scanned the scene fast. The bear was near the cages, frantic. The poachers looked ready to fight. Then he saw it, a gun, half buried in a crate nearby. It was now or never. Carson grabbed it, turning to face the poachers and raising the weapon. "Stay back!" he shouted, his voice shaking but strong. The men froze, eyes wide. "You don't want to do this," one of them said, trying to sound calm. Carson didn't flinch. "I'm not letting you hurt them," he said, keeping his aim steady. The bear was pawing at the cages, her cubs whimpering inside. Thinking fast, Carson pointed the gun at one of the men. "You tie them up," "With those chains," he ordered, nodding toward a heavy coil lying nearby. The man hesitated, but Carson raised the gun higher. "Now!" Grudgingly, the poacher obeyed, wrapping the chains around the others. Carson watched every move, his pulse loud in his ears. One mistake could change everything. With the poachers restrained, Carson allowed himself a breath. He stepped over and grabbed a key from one of their jackets, unlocking the cage that held the bear cubs. His hands were steady now, powered by purpose. The door creaked as it opened. For a moment, the cubs hesitated. Then they bolted out. Carson stepped back, giving them space. The mother bear's eyes never left her babies. "You're free now," Carson whispered, emotion catching in his throat. The cubs rushed to her side, nuzzling into her fur. They trembled, caught between fear and joy. The bear let out a low, relieved grunt, licking their heads, her eyes full of love. Carson watched, a lump forming in his throat. The danger, the fear, it had all led to this. A family, reunited. For a few seconds, he and the bear shared a look, something wordless but real. Then, gently, she turned and nudged her cubs forward. "Take care," Carson whispered. He knew she wouldn't understand the words, but he hoped she felt what he meant. She grunted softly and led her cubs into the woods. Carson stood still, watching them fade into the trees. A quiet sense of peace settled in his chest. Soon after, the sound of sirens broke the forest silence. The police had arrived. Carson let out a long breath of relief. Officers moved quickly, arresting the poachers and collecting evidence. Carson handed over his phone with the footage and explained everything he had seen. "You did good," one of the officers said, giving him a firm pat on the shoulder. Carson nodded, feeling something close to closure. The forest felt calm again. Justice had been served. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one. Every share helps us tell more powerful tales. Thank you for being a part of it.